Let's face it, business technology is frustrating and complex. So how do you make sure it works for your team? To make IT right, start the discussion at go-domain.com. You're listening to Discussions by Domain, a podcast for business leaders. Our discussions may be with people you've probably heard of before, but the majority of our guests are in the trenches, professionals like you and I, with the same challenges and struggles of keeping up in the Northeast. They're implementing strategies, overcoming hurdles. They're leading the fastest growing businesses in our region. My name is Anthony DeGraw, Director of Partnerships at Domain Computer Services, and the host of this show. When I'm not talking with business leaders, you'll hear stories from behind the scenes of Domain and the ups and downs of our own growth journey, as we intend to take over the world. Just kidding. Well, maybe. Let's get into the show. Welcome to another episode of Discussions by Domain. Today we have Brian Burke, the director of the Crypsis Group. Hey Brian, welcome to the show, and can you start by telling us a little bit about yourself and your background and the things you guys are up to at Crypsis nowadays?
Absolutely. Thank you very much for having me, Anthony. Truly appreciate the opportunity to get on the podcast. So without further ado, I work for the Crypsis Group. I'm a director based in the New York area. We have offices across the United States, but we are a cybersecurity advisory firm. We are focused on data breach response, digital forensics, and expert witness work. We've been working on a few other things as well. We've had some recent hires who have more of a risk management or a proactive type of background. So we're looking to build out a little bit of that proactive services. And we're also looking to build out our expert witness practice as well, in terms of individuals like our CEO, Brett Padres, or our VP, Sam Rubin, who have a thorough background of providing litigation support. So we're looking for some of those opportunities to happen a little bit more frequently in the future. But as I mentioned, we're a forensics shop. So we're focused a lot of times on business email compromise, ransomware events, and things of that nature. So like I said, right now we're dealing with a big ransomware trend in 2019, and that's one of the things that we're seeing quite often.
Yeah, no, thank you for that introduction. And why don't we just jump in right there? Tell us about the trends of ransomware in 2019 and what you guys are seeing. How is it affecting businesses?
Absolutely. So the ransomware trend is quite interesting. I think to start in 2018, the ransomware trends seem to be lower hanging fruit for cyber attackers. And what I mean by lower hanging fruit are companies that just may not have the resources, or just may not have the time, or just may not have got around to trying to mitigate their cyber risk. So I do feel that attackers have gone out there and picked off that low hanging fruit in terms of getting into the environment and dropping ransomware and malware and requesting a ransom that could be a fraction of a Bitcoin up to, several Bitcoins. And I think over the course of 2018, that was a true trend. At the end of last year, I would say probably November and December, we started seeing, we being Crypsis and the remaining, folks in the industry, we started seeing a lot more serious ransomware attacks. The variants of ransomware being used were, quite impressive in the sense of how it could debilitate a company. So what we've seen are, attackers coming in, affecting the backups. That could be deleting backups, encrypting backups, and then leaving kind of the company at odds. If you're not able to back up from what you've had previously, and you need that data to kind of keep your doors open and to continue business as usual, it puts you in a very difficult predicament. Without those backups, what do we do? And we're not only seeing the new variants of ransomware affecting backups, we're also seeing these variants spreading like wildfire throughout throughout the environment, a victim to a ransomware attack. So not only is it just something that, before we're seeing maybe one server, two servers, a few servers out of the environment being affected and backups being okay. Now we're seeing the backups being affected, and we're seeing kind of, a mass ransomware attack throughout the client's environment. So that's very challenging. But it does leave individuals who are victim to this in quite a predicament for business interruption, which is a very big issue. How many days are they going to be without their data? How many days are they going to be not operating as usual? And how does that affect them? Will they have to, shut business down, or is there something that they can do to combat that? And in these situations, not only have we seen very serious ransomware and malware, we've seen things like BitPaymer or Ryuk or Emotet and combinations of the ransomware and malware that have just been very serious. Some of the malware is looking for PCI or PII and skimming that. And then, in conjunction with that, we also have very high ransoms that we're seeing now. We're not necessarily seeing a fraction of a Bitcoin to several Bitcoin. We've seen very frequently six-figure ransom demands. I wish I could say that a $500,000 ransom is something that I don't see often. However, we're seeing that trend rise.
Wow. So it used to be, a couple $1,000, but now it seems like that's jumping through the roof.
Very true. Very true. I was dealing with a client the other day, and I'm blanking on the name of the actual ransomware that was used, but it was funny because it was something that I haven't heard for a while. And right there, right off the bat, when I knew it wasn't a name that I've been hearing frequently, I knew that the ransom was going to be on the lower end of things. And I understood that the company, could really combat this. You do have, I would say, less sophisticated attackers who can just ride on the heels of, I guess, attackers who are kind of, starting new trends within the cyber industry. There are individuals who are using old variants, some variants of which you may or may not be able to find, decryption tools online for them. And they're just less sophisticated attacks that happen. But in the same breath, like I said, we're dealing with some nation state actors and some very sophisticated, hacking groups that are out there. And it's kind of far and few between now that I'm seeing some, less serious amounts for sure.
Wow. So an area that you mentioned was business interruption. I'd like to dive into that a little bit more with you. If you could explain what that means to the business owners out there, and what is the typical time frame that you are seeing, or the average time frame where people are down and can't operate their business?
It's a very good question. And I think I have a lot of partners, a lot of clients, just people that I speak with in the industry, and getting the specifics behind an attack they're always helpful and they're always needed. But, in terms of, for instance, determining an exact length of time for business interruption, it's really situational. It does depend on the client's environment, their network security, the folks that they're using, whether that would be their internal, IT department, whether they're outsourcing that, whether they're partnered with an MSP. It really depends on the sophistication of the client in terms of their, I guess, network security. And right then and there, you can kind of, figure out if you're going to have, I guess, the appropriate team to combat a ransomware event. If we're dealing with, a mom and pop shop, any type of company, any type of industry vertical that is not very, tech savvy, is not using, an external MSP or MSSP partner, you're going to run into some roadblocks. You're going to have a lot of information that you're really wishing that you had, a lot of insight into the network security that you're wishing that you had. So in those situations, the BI is going to be much longer. But, just for the sake of this conversation, you could be looking at a week easily.
I think that's a good
interruption.
Pretty good average right there, just out the gate.
I would say something along those lines. Again, you can have a sophisticated company that gets back up and running much sooner. You could also have a sophisticated company who's dealing with a very sophisticated attack, and therefore the BI is longer. So again, it tends to be situational. The way I look at it is the victim of this attack. Were they prepared? Were they not prepared? What do they have in place currently? Who do they have in terms of partners, IT, MSP, law, forensics? Do they have an IR plan in place? These sorts of things play in a lot to how long that business interruption is going to be. There are times when there's, on my end, just a fire drill. I'm getting a call from an attorney who has a client, whether they have a cyber insurance policy or they don't, who is needing assistance. Now, when I get the call, we, at Crypsis and in the forensics world understand urgency, right? So we're going to move as quick as possible. But there are some times when we find out that this ransomware attack maybe happened a week ago or a few days ago. And the process to get to a forensics consultant would be, that was kind of a long journey. So what had happened in the meantime? What happened during that process? Did the ransomware spread? Did it become more serious? Were there things that happened over the course of that time before getting a forensic firm involved that is detrimental to the company, to the backups, and, ultimately to the business interruption?
Gotcha. That makes a lot of sense. I wanted you to dig into that too. So you get that emergency phone call. We have ransomware. We're locked up. How does that look like on your end? And what can a client expect from engaging with Crypsis?
What it looks like on my end is, our standard process, just to keep it simple, is I will receive a call or an email from either a partner that I work with or from a client directly, and they'll have a ransomware incident, right? And then from there, what I'll do is I'll communicate the issue, the extent of the issue, any information that was given to me up front, and I will pass that along to my forensics team. To take a step back, Crypsis is like I said, it's a forensic shop at heart. We're not trying to be all things to all people. We really just want to do forensics to the best of our ability, and really perform to the best of our ability, which is giving a great deliverable to those that we work with, right? So the majority of Crypsis is built up of our professional services team, and our professional services team is just our team of forensic consultants. They range in experience and title, but what I'll do once I receive an inquiry is go to my forensics team, and I'll find an individual who has the expertise and the availability to jump on the line with, let's say, legal, the client, any outside partners from IT or MSP perspective. And from there, we'll assess the issue. We want to understand the timeline. What had happened? And we want to get that information from the horse's mouth, from the client, and more specifically from somebody in the InfoSec world or in the IT world that can, kind of speak to a more granular level of what actually happened behind the scenes. My forensics team will then ask any and all questions they need to put together a statement of work. And then from there, if terms are agreeable, we will move forward and help assist the client. So, long story short, urgency is, the number one, I think, priority in any and all type of cyber incidents. So if terms are agreeable, we could turn things around and start working ASAP. It is a business decision, so sometimes you need to get insurance or legal or the companies, to think about it and, kind of mull it over before making a decision. But we're able to move forward quite quickly. And then in terms of what the engagement would be, Crypsis offers, two different services in the ransomware realm. One of them being the recovery, right? So our ransomware recovery service would be, we have a company, or have a client, I should say. They could be insured or not insured, but we have a client and they have been hit with ransomware and they're choosing to initiate communication with the attackers in, hopes of getting a response, understanding what the ransom is, and they'd like to pay that ransom to get some of their data back. So what Crypsis does in that situation for recovery is on the client's behalf, Crypsis will initiate that communication with the attacker. From there, we will kind of work with them to facilitate the payment. Payment is, most often made in Bitcoin. So Crypsis is able to facilitate that payment. And we do ask for kind of proof of life along the way. We want to understand that the attacker that we're speaking with, that they actually do have the ability to decrypt the files that the client is wanting back. So once we understand that we have proof of life, we will then move forward with, facilitating that payment. Once we facilitate that payment, the attacker will give us a decryption utility. Crypsis will reverse engineer that decryption tool. We want to make sure there's no additional malware that is there that could affect the client in a whole another matter. So we will then kind of walk the client through that process of decrypting, whatever in their network has been affected. And we kind of step by step walk them through that process. What we like to do is we also like to do a forensic investigation that complements the ransomware recovery. Again, it all depends what the client, their legal and their insurance team, think is necessary for the situation. But, we will do a forensic investigation, as well. And that's trying to dive into the incident at hand, how this had happened, maybe where it was coming from, and, kind of give you some information to maybe close up some back doors or open windows for kind of, helping your security in the future and trying to, make sure that an event like this doesn't happen. So it's one of two things that we do, and it kind of all depends on the client's need. In terms of business interruption and a company needing to pay a ransom, that ransomware recovery is going to be the utmost priority. That's where the urgency is going to be. And then the forensic investigation kind of takes a backseat to that.
That makes a ton of sense, and it's interesting to know that a company like yourselves can actually engage the attackers, cyber criminals, on the organization's behalf. Like, you use that concept, proof of life, which I really liked, to make sure that it's actually going to get done.
Yeah, 100%. It's funny, there is sometimes an honor among thieves. You kind of laugh about that age-old phrase, but for the most part, in these type of situations, an attacker is not going to want to do something that's going to affect their business, and their business is unfortunately an illegal crime that is crippling, companies and some of the individuals that Crypsis works with. But in the same breath, they want to make sure that they get paid. So if they do provide a decryption key that has added malware, or if, they do accept the ransom payment, but then they don't give the key afterwards, those are things that will affect that attacker or that group moving forward. So it's not in every situation, but like I said, there tends to be an honor among thieves. And I would say percentage wise is in the high 90s, if not, in the 99%, that we are receiving proof of life. We're moving forward from there. We're facilitating payment. We're getting the decryption utility, and that is working. We've run into situations where the decryption utility only works for a certain group or a set of servers, let's say, and you need to, from there move forward to get another decryption utility. But that's kind of the game of the attacker and kind of what the characteristics of that attacker or that group is, and if that's something that they do. So again, it's a very interesting situation. Just unfortunate that we have to be dealing with it.
Yeah, completely understand. Can we switch gears a little bit from that ransomware area over to the business email compromise incidents that you guys are seeing, and maybe some tips where people can better protect themselves in that area?
Sure. That's a great topic, to be honest. So in terms of business email compromise, let's say most recently, it was probably yesterday, most recently, I was given an opportunity for a business email compromise matter. And it is tied to, a fraudulent wire. right? So I do see a lot of these situations where there is a compromise. We've seen a ton of email compromises be on the Microsoft 365 platform, but we've seen anything from Gmail to Outlook to Yahoo. So attackers are agnostic in that sense. They're not going after one system or another. But the long and short of it is we do see a lot of these email compromises leading to some type of falsified or spoofed email that is then allowing the attacker to gain some sort of credentials, whether that's further PII, whether that is, the attacker getting involved, acting as if they are the CFO of a company and emailing an employee or a client of that company asking for a wire transfer, and the transfer is not going internally within that company and not going from client to the company. It's really going to the attacker. That situation has happened quite frequently. And one of the things for business email compromise that folks need to understand is that if an attacker does get into your network and does compromise one email address, there are situations where attackers can then move laterally within the system from one email address to the next and even deeper further into the environment. So one thing to keep in mind is that business email compromise is not something to kind of shun off. It's definitely something to be mindful of, I should say. And one of the biggest things to combat email compromise, I would say, is multi-factor authentication, dual factor authentication. So whatever type of email you're having, whatever you're using, whatever type of laptop or desktop you're using, it doesn't matter. If you are able to put in place that dual factor authentication, it should stop a lot of these threats.
Yeah, it's a great piece of advice, and we're seeing a lot of people not actually execute on that. And the technology, doesn't matter what platform you use, is relatively inexpensive per user, and it's just it's so easy to use nowadays. It used to be, I think, more of a frustration, and now it's full circle where it's just so simple and easy to use.
I 100% agree, and it's just happening more and more. Let's see. I mean, trying to think how many different apps I have on my phone that are just not work related, but they have the dual factor, there, whether it's when I'm going to, sign on to pay my mortgage or whatever it may be. The multi-factor is becoming more apparent, which is great. And to your point, Anthony, the ease of use is it kind of makes no excuses. If it's there, it's easy to use. Definitely put that in place. Another thing to say is, I'll take this in two directions, and Anthony, you can run with it in any which way you please. Another thing to think about is speaking about, let's say, wire transfers, right? If an email compromise leads to a loss of funds, whether that is the company that experienced this email compromise or whether it is a client of that company that has experienced the compromise. If there's a loss of funds somewhere in there, if there's an attacker who had spoofed an email and resulted to the attacker receiving funds, definitely something to be aware of. And I've been speaking with many individuals about, putting a policy in place internally. Again, it's going to depend on the sophistication and the size of a company and how many locations they have and so on and so forth. But if you can put processes and procedures in place that when somebody is requesting a wire transfer, maybe it's not just an email that you're going off of to get confirmation. Maybe there is a phone call that has to be, going along with that. Maybe you have to get up from your desk and walk down the hall to the CFO's office or accounts payable to have a face-to-face interaction. There could be many things that you put in place, but just another added level of security to kind of help you out there. And, as I say that, Crypsis has also dealt with issues where the victim did receive a phone call and it was from the attacker and they did have a communication with the attacker, which did lead to, that loss of funds, that fraudulent wire. So, You really can't substitute face-to-face communication to ensure things. But again, if there's something else that you can put in place in terms of those wire transfers, I know another hoop to jump through can slow down business. It could be a pain internally, but if it saves you or your client any type of loss of funds, I think it's definitely something to think about.
Yeah, and that's a huge point right there, is pick up the phone. And even to your point that that's not potentially solving the full issue, but it's going to stop probably another 80 to 90% of them.
Yeah, absolutely. And again, it's just putting different levels, different layers in place to help out as you move forward. And as you're looking at emails, when people send you emails internally or externally, you can do the age-old trick of, taking the cursor and hovering it over the email address. Is that the correct email address? Is it brian.burke@thecrypsisgroup.com, or is it bburke@crypsis.com? Is there something altered to that email address? Take a look at the signature blocks. Are they the same? Again, these things can be altered. An attacker can still be behind what may look like a completely legitimate email address or a completely legitimate, signature block at the bottom of your email. However, there are different indicators that you can look out for along the way. So just something to keep in mind.
Yeah, that's good stuff. To wrap up today, who is a charitable organization that you support as an individual or as a family, or does Crypsis as a company support that we can give some light to over this podcast?
That's a great question. So I wanted to mention two from companies that I've worked at. One of the notable names in terms of charitable organizations that has come up time and time again is St. Jude's. So I've been a part of, I think it probably started in college, but I've been seeing St. Jude's for quite a long time. I think I actually did a trip down to Memphis. I'm pretty sure I'm saying this correctly, but I want to say the hospital is based down in Memphis, and that was a few months ago. So I just wanted to make sure that I gave them a shout in supporting them, and then obviously going down my rabbit hole of my passion for food and cooking and so on and so forth. I would say No Kid Go Hungry as well.
Awesome. So we will definitely link to them in the show notes of this episode to make sure people can quickly access them. Thank you so much for your time today. I appreciate you coming on, and I look forward to the next one.
Absolutely, Anthony. Thank you so much. It's been a pleasure, and I'll speak with you soon.
Thank you, sir. To ensure that you never miss an episode, subscribe to the show in iTunes or your favorite podcast player. This guarantees that every episode will get delivered directly to your device. To help us get the word out, share with a friend, leave a review, and check out our discussions on the web at go-domain.com/podcast. Thank you so much for listening. Until next time.